All right, good morning, everybody. This is January 25th, Tuesday. This is a work session of the Portland City Council, and we'll go ahead and turn it over to Commissioner Ryan. Commissioner Ryan, good morning.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session. I'm gonna go ahead and bump this actually over to, I think it's Commissioner Maps that gets started this morning.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. Colleagues, we're here to let me get the phone.
Actually, while Commissioner Maps is doing that, I know we're joined by all of our directors and Director.
Sorry about that.
You're here this morning. Okay. I was trying to cover for you while you took that call.
Oh, thank you. No, I don't need to do this. The phone was just across the room.
You know, everybody, we did not practice this. Just in case.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
Thank goodness this is just the dress rehearsal.
Commissioner Maps, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, we are here today to discuss the critical topic of how we are improving the permitting process here in the City of Roses. Let me begin today by sharing a story with you about why I agreed to co-chair the Permits Task Force. I've served on City Council for 1 year and 25 days at this point. In that time, I've learned that two factors are holding back our city's economic recovery. First, of course, there are public safety and livability concerns, basically fear of crime and homelessness. And second, there is fear of our permits office. Entrepreneurs, large and small, are reluctant to open new businesses in Portland because they are not confident that they can successfully navigate Portland's complex permitting process. This is true of billion-dollar investments that would transform our city, and it is true with small businesses like bakeries and bars. Feedback from the public and the city auditor have told us that the city of Portland has a permits problem. Frankly, it just takes too long to get a building permit from the city of Portland. and our customer service is bad. Now, there are many reasons for this problem. Our form of government is one. We have 7 different bureaus issuing building permits instead of a one-stop shop for permits. There are often 7 stops along the way of your permits marathon. Each bureau that issues permits operates under its own rules and procedures, and no one is in charge of making sure the entire permitting process is working smoothly. There are other problems too. In order to address that problem, Commissioner Ryan and I have created a task force comprised of staff from bureaus that issue permits and members of the building community. I'd like to thank our frontline development staff in keeping this important work going during the past 2 years of racial reckoning and global pandemic. This work is incredibly important, and we know staff have continued to do this work often with fewer resources and fewer staff. We know this work is critical to the economic recovery of our city, and we are committed to support staff to do this work well. We want to ensure this work can be done well, sustainably, and resourced accordingly. Now, here to share a little more with us today is Water Bureau Director Gabe Salmner. Director Salmner, welcome.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and welcome to Mayor and Commissioners and staff. It has been a pleasure to work on a task force like this, and how often do you actually get to say that and mean it? What I wanted to say just as we're welcoming you is to thank Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Mapps for their efforts. I think that anyone who has been involved in permitting at this point knows what a daunting task this has been. And I really thank Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Mapps for coming into this clear-eyed, and they have learned the lessons of our past efforts in this area, but they have not gotten discouraged when the going got tough. They have really pushed the task force to be creative and to be open to new ideas. And they've still stayed focused on the root causes, and they've brought data and evidence-based efforts to our work. And that has been, I think, really the secret to our success. So I just want to echo Commissioner Mapps in, as he said, we have been very well served by the frontline staff through this pandemic. I think they are our unsung heroes, and we are listening to them. We are learning from them to know how we can better change our systems to support them and to get the outcomes that we want. So it has been a pleasure to serve on this task force. I am excited to show you what we have done over a few short months to really understand this issue and to work on solutions.
Thank you, Director Salmer. If we go to the next slide, please. There is a next slide. There we go. Yeah, that went the other way. There we go. Forward. And thank you, Commissioner Mapps, while we're working through this technical difficulty. Yeah, it'd be great to go to the next slide. There we go. All right. Good morning, Portland. All right. So I am going to take a moment to just start off by saying it's been actually wonderful for, I know for me personally, and I know Commissioner Mapps and I have talked about this, you have 2 commissioners diving into some weeds, and we don't usually do that. And by far the best part of this journey has been getting to know many of our hardworking staff on the front lines. So please know that that's been one of the best parts of this whole process. And it is complicated, and it's taken decades for us to get to this point. As the saying goes, if it was easy, it would have been solved years ago. And as you can see from the summary timeline, recommendations have been made repeatedly to consolidate permitting bureaus, streamline regulatory processes, track and improve performance metrics, and improve inter-bureau coordination. Whether it was 1997, 2000, 2004, 2014, or most recently, 2021, the problems have been called out. Unfortunately, although there have been some well-intentioned edits, we have failed to dig deeper and provide the bold transformational system change work necessary to improve our permitting at the City of Portland. Let's go to the next slide. Which brings us to today and the need to align our efforts across the city to provide a timely, high quality, and customer-focused permitting system. As a council, we've identified the priorities which were mentioned by Commissioner Mapps earlier, and permitting process clearly impacts our housing crisis and economic recovery, from granting permitting fee waivers for shelters to the $1.2 billion of pending projects currently in the permitting pipeline. The most recent audit released just last spring was not a surprise and echoed many themes from past audits and reports. Please notice the final bullet really does call it out: stronger governance to solve systemic problems. As such, as a council, we have a legacy opportunity at this time to make meaningful transformational change to ensure a safe built environment and a timely and customer-friendly process. Next slide. Following the release of the audit in March, it was just 1 month later that Commissioner Mapps and I convened a permit improvement task force. The task force, which includes about 34 members, have been meeting every 4 to 6 weeks consistently and working in small groups, where the work is done for sure in between meetings, to identify and launch process improvements, review performance data, and dive into systemic regulatory and design issues. Staff members from all 5 council offices have been regular attendees and engaged participants in these task force meetings. Thank you for your commitment and your staff's time for this effort. It's been an all-in effort. Members have included directors, division leads, permitting staff, and most importantly, customers who interact with the permitting system. And in last year's budget, we asked the council to improve the allocation of funds for a staff person to dive in and coordinate this work across all permitting bureaus. We are serious about getting this work done. We will be known as the council that did not kick this can down the road. Soon you will hear from that hire that we got on board in the late summer. But for now, let's go to the next slide. The task force has been intentional about its focus on the customer. When I first started to learn about this work, it surprised me to find out that the most customers are not large commercial builders. They are residential and small business owners. You can see from this graph that the largest share of permit seekers are residential alterations. This is followed by new residential construction, commercial alterations, which are often small and medium-sized businesses repurposing and remodeling space for their business operations. Engaging with the public on this issue is critical. We hear from constituents consistently, and their ideas and partnerships are key to how we can work better together. On that note, I'd like to introduce 3 guests who have graciously agreed to join us today to share their experiences with the permitting process. I'll go ahead and introduce the 3 of them now. And we will start with Maurice Rami, who is the co-owner of O'Neill Construction. Maurice will be followed by Zane Goff, project manager of solar at Neil Kelly Company. And then finally, Ernesto Fonseca, executive director of Hacienda House. Maurice Rami, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Ryan, and thank you, Commissioner Mapps, and the directors and the staff that participated in this. One of the things I would say is that I sit on a lot of task force, right? I would say this is extremely refreshing, seeing the directors and everyone kind of lean into the problem and look at solution-based approaches to how do we fix this. As a small contractor and as a small business that builds in the city, it's sad when you see a project that gets derailed only because of the permit process or is delayed so far that the owners kind of give up on the construction in its entirety as far as the expansion and so on. So with this, I feel like we are definitely heading in the right direction. And like I said, there was so much collaboration in this. I was amazed and surprised to see how everyone kind of leaned in, listened to all the different facets of what needs to be fixed, corrected, listened to on the customer side, and really was, like I said, it was a solution-based approach to this. I'm excited to kind of move this forward because, again, I think that what this helps is for the small residential homeowner that wants to add an addition, that, I challenge anyone to go through the current process and say, okay, do it yourself. Usually you have to hire someone to kind of even walk you through the documents. I think what we're doing here, it allows people to understand whether their projects are a go or a no-go quickly and easily, without a major expense, especially on these small businesses, homeowners and alike. And so I was excited to be part of this. And again, my hats go off to all the city staff for really engaging in this work. This work will help small businesses. This work will help homeowners to be able to do the work that they need to do in an effective way in a real time. And so again, I was excited to be part of it. I was more excited to see the outcomes, and I was more excited to see the engagement of everyone participating and not just checking the box off, but coming with real solutions to the problem. Again, thank you. My hats go off to all of you. And thank you so much, Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Maps, for actually having the foresight to take on this challenge. This is a big challenge, and it's something that needs to get done to move our city forward. So thanks again for giving me the time to speak.
Thank you so much, Maurice. And next we have Zane Goff. Zane, are you here?
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Yeah, welcome.
I'd like to echo Maurice there and just thank everybody for bringing this to the forefront as a critical issue for the economy as well as the environment. So I'm the project manager for the Neil Kelly Solar, and I'm also a technical committee member at the Oregon Solar and Storage Industries Association. That's a trade group that represents solar installers for mostly small and small residential to small commercial systems. So they are most often small local businesses trying to help green our power grid. We are a small local PV installer. Mostly we work in the residential market. So when we had that slide up of the distribution of the type of permits pulled, we're part of that large orange piece of residential alterations. We're working on the city's older housing stock that requires additional structural engineering and is often using more energy, so we can have a bigger impact on the older, less efficient homes. Solar is an expanding industry, and that's really exciting for us. We're hiring, we're growing, and we want to see it grow within the city. So seeing that you guys are focused on making an easier process that's more consistent with the code interpretations, a simpler application process, and a more reasonable turnaround time. Those are all net positives for small businesses, for the homeowners that want to be more green, as well as the businesses, or I guess the third thing would be the impact that Portland can have on addressing climate pollution and mitigating climate change. All my experiences with the people at BDS, the employees are intelligent, helpful, and professional. The process is often difficult and challenging. And as a local company that does a lot of business right within the city of Portland, we've worked to learn those processes. And as a company, I think we've done pretty well. other companies, national companies that are part of the Oregon solar industry, often they choose not to work in Portland. They just won't take customers in the city of Portland because the permitting process is so difficult and is not consistent with the permitting process in other jurisdictions. One of the aspects of that is the structural engineering requirements. We're often charged a higher rate by the engineers that we work with to work within the city of Portland. That's a direct impact on our business and on the affordability of solar within the community here. And we also make sure that engineers are familiar with the permitting process at Portland and have worked with the jurisdiction, because it's just often more difficult, more extensive, and we need a sharper pencil to get through it all. I think I'll just close with, once again, this for the solar industry here, as well as the homeowners and members of the communities that are really striving to have an impact on climate change. I think this is a really important thing that you guys are doing, and we appreciate the attention this issue is getting today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Zane. Thanks for being here. It's great to hear from someone working in solar. We've heard a lot from your constituents. Next on the dais is welcome Ernesto Fonseca, Executive Director of Hacienda House. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ryan. Mayor Wheeler, commissioners, thank you for having us over today. So I, as a developer, we do affordable housing development as well as some commercial developments. Currently, we are doing about 784 units across the region, and with 142 currently being here in Portland and that are under construction of this Portland. I was asked, by our commissioners to explain to you a little bit, my experience, with the building permitting process. And I have to say that, it's, beyond California, is perhaps Portland's, one of the most complicated cities to get a permit process. And it's not so much the complication, the technical complication of the permitting process. For the most part, I would say it's about the same in terms of requirements, across the United States. Although I have done most business, in Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, California, now here in Oregon. But it is the length of the process that really drags on and on and on, and the disjointment that comes with the many different bureaus. 7 bureaus altogether are involved in any of these processes, and you have heard this many times before. And that is also not unusual. You have to have, from the fire department to the transportation department to everybody, involved into this process. The problem here that I have seen, regards to other cities, specifically with the city of Phoenix, is that we don't have a single point of contact, a navigator, a group of people or department that will be shepherding this process along. I must agree with Zane that, when you really drag this permitting process for months and months, for Adelitas, for example, took us almost a year to get this permit process from going from application date to the design review, which kept changing. As soon as some of those rules and new code came in, all of those, requirements pile up back on us. And while we are, carrying loans and trying to do all of these things on the back end, on the actual building, we're spending much more money on that end. And as Zane mentioned, anybody that is going to be working with the city of Portland permitting process will have to charge a little bit more because time is expensive. And that time that they will be going back and forth between reviews and having to connect the dots between the different bureaus and departments, it's actually quite complicated because the departments are not talking to each other. My recommendation at the end of the day, has been pretty consistent over the past 5 years, that we need to have a single point of contact that will be navigating and really coordinating all of these efforts between the different departments. It is imperative, I think, in my view, to have a task force within the city of Portland that really is addressing each one of these permit requests, so we don't have to be going around and around in circles. The other piece, as I mentioned earlier, is the timing process. We're looking into 7 to 12 months traditionally, in some worst cases, up to over years. But if we can reduce that timeline to 2 to 3 months, even though it sounds a little too much, it is extremely doable, and most cities can do it. We can do it here. So those will be my comments and recommendations. And I hope that we can put together that task force that is shepherding the permit process. We have one single planner, walking through all departments, and those departments, have a combined unit that will be overseeing the building permit, process altogether. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maurice, Zane, and Ernesto from Hacienda CDC. Sorry for the slip earlier. Really thank you for your time and sharing your experiences this morning. You are the partners in how we work together to make this permitting work more efficient and more consistent once we make those efficiencies changes. Will you please stay with us a little bit for the Q&A that's next, coming up soon. It'll be about 10 minutes. Next slide, please. As we move through this meeting this morning, you will be receiving a lot of information, and this is really complex and layered process. Commissioner Mapps and I ask that you engage in the questions and discussions you keep, and that you keep this call to action front and center. Here's what we're asking: the council to listen to what we are actively doing to address these issues and consider the long-term system change recommendations that we want to further develop for later council agreement and action. And at the conclusion of the work session, I'll be asking each member of the council to share one concrete statement in less than 30 seconds on what you would like to see when we come back to you with recommendations for much needed reforms this spring. If we go to the next slide, I think we're opening it up for questions, and we'll have 10 minutes for this area. And thanks again for our guests for staying around. So the floor is open to my colleagues. Ask any questions.
Go ahead and jump in. I got my hand up. I'm very proud that I figured out how to make that work this morning. So thank you for the context. Thank you for setting this up. I truly appreciate the business leaders who've come in and testified for some of these changes. So these are not new needs. And over the course of several studies, the problems that these fine individuals have identified have been previously identified. As you pointed out, Commissioner Ryan, there have been several unfavorable audits highlighting some of the disjointed nature. And I guess as I look at this, I see 2, maybe 3 areas for improvement. And the first was somebody said we need a single point of contact. And my question is this: is the appropriate single point of contact one individual who works through all of the different fragmented bureau relationships in order to get their permit quickly and efficiently? Or alternatively, is the right answer here to, instead of making somebody run from bureau to bureau to bureau to bureau, and as you correctly pointed out, there are 7 permitting bureaus, why don't we just consolidate the permitting functions? And that way, the single point of contact is a permitting division or a permitting office or a permitting bureau that already has all of those functions collaborating internally. And then it's not up to the customer to try and figure out how to navigate the bureaus. It's up to the bureaus to figure out how to work with the customer collectively. So I'm not sure who my question is for, but I guess the question is, what stands in the way of us consolidating those bureau functions? And
Thank you.
Is it as simple as the form of government, or is there something else going on here?
Well, welcome to this session, Mayor Wheeler. I appreciate you being bold to just frame it so crisply. I think what I need to do is say that these are the questions that we're asking on the task force right now. We are diving into structure change. And so I will tell you that what this work session is about is to getting your top of mind thinking, just like you revealed. So that is now in the record. And we will be debating in the task force the questions that you just proposed and the statements that you just made.
And then the second question I would ask is, I took a dive into these weighty questions a couple of years ago. And one thing that really surprised me, now speaking on behalf of our permitting bureau employees, who, by the way, work really hard. I want to be clear, the problem here is not incompetence. The problem here is not laziness. I have sat alongside those individuals in various bureaus who do this work, and they work really hard. And they're very smart people, and they take their job seriously. So I want to be crystal clear. I don't see our employees as being the problem so much as the structure and the process. And part of what I noticed and what our employees identified as being an issue is that a number of the permits, when they come in the door, they are far from complete. They are far from ready. They're just not ready for prime time. And that slows the process down considerably, because somebody submits the permit, then they have to wait until the permit is acted upon. That takes some period of time. When it is acted upon, the permitting individual in one of these 7 bureaus sends it back and says, I'm really sorry, this isn't complete, or that isn't complete. Or sometimes there's miscommunication between bureaus. Somebody thinks it's complete in their bureau, but not complete in another bureau. And so it suggests that we need help at the front end, helping people to better ensure that their applications are complete, that the proper information has been provided so that they don't run into these stumbling blocks. And I in particular heard from people who are seeking permits for the first time, lower income folks, people from communities of color, new contractors, others who may not have regular connections in the permitting bureaus but are coming forward with important projects, need more upfront guidance in order to be successful in the permitting process. Are part of your recommendations going to focus on the upfront, making sure that the applications are in fact complete? I'm seeing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That was actually in the first task force meeting. This was a pretty long conversation. And that's why we focused on customer service instantly in the task force, and making sure that in the beginning stages, there's more relational beginnings to guide through this. Because of our time, we're taking notes, and this will come back to the task force. Thank you, Mayor. And I see Ernesto, you have your hand up, and then Commissioner Hardesty.
Yes, I just want to elaborate a little bit on the proposal that I made that Mayor Wheeler already, acknowledged that has been, already discussed in the past. And I do think that it's not a person, it is a department that will be shepherding this entire process. The way we have divided in our cities, not myself, but I have seen it, is that they have different divisions. So you have the multifamily, commercial, industrial, single family home, small home, that sort of thing, groups. And those groups, will be taking in these applications. They sit together to make a review of all of it, with different, other bureau department employees reviewing this and whether they meet the list or not, and then they send it back right away. If the permit actually, meets all requirements, then they go through the process themselves. But you have that one single point of contact. I don't mean one individual, but one department. In this case, I would think that the BDS would be the appropriate department for us to bring things forward. And once you have all of those divisions, commercial, multifamily, skyscrapers, you name it, we can make as many as we can. They will have their own teams to make those reviews. And I do believe that if we do this, and expedite, streamline the process, we could make a big dent in accelerating not only the timeline, but also reducing cost.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. First, I want to just thank the small business owners who are taking times away from their small businesses to help us try to get this right finally. I want to also second what the mayor says, which is we have incredibly hardworking employees all over the city of Portland who are absolutely committed to doing their jobs well. My question to Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Mapps is, are you actually looking at it even from a higher perspective? In my 3 years on city council, I've learned that bureaus who have the ability to charge money, and bureaus who have no ability to charge money don't. And so what that means is, you don't have to pay when a fire truck shows up, right? But if you want to build something, you have to do all these permits. And the way the city funds city core services is really out of whack with actually how do we prioritize what we as the city council are responsible for in the city of Portland. The fact that bureau's budgets are based on permitting fees, and those fees are what's paying the FTE, is a problem. And I just want to put that out there in the public eye, is that bureaus won't be that excited about giving up employees if that means that it's going to have an impact on their bottom line. And so, but what I know is every reform we've put in place up until this point, like the last one, I remember a developer telling me that it used to take 2 years to do a process, and then it was improved, and then it took 3 years, right? So, and so we have to look at how the city funds the core services that we say every Portlander is entitled to, and then figure out how we fund it. Because what we do is very piecemeal as far as the dollars that come in. But every time you make a change, that will impact a bureau's bottom line. And if we're not straightforward and upfront about that, we will come back with an unworkable plan. And so I hope that both Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Mapps is really looking at just how we fund city core services, because that's going to be a big key on whether or not you're going to get the kind of cooperation necessary to really rethink how we do this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. We have been focused primarily on looking at objective data and working with our customers to figure out how to get to the bottom of how we can improve our services and improve all of the complaints that have been made and have been called out in numerous audits and reports. We will look at the impact of the transactional fees that you mentioned as we get towards the end. But first and foremost, we need to land the plane on what's going to improve this system. And then we have to look at the structural issues that you mentioned around fees. And that will come up when we bring this back to the dais in a form of an ordinance. So thank you. This will now be put into the register of something that has a big factor that we'll look at. I appreciate it. Because of time and because we want to make sure we get through the whole session, we're going to have to move on. So keep holding your questions. We'll have several Q&A moments throughout. If we could go to the next slide, please. And if the guest can remain, that would be great. I know you all have busy schedules, as was just mentioned. So again, thank you all three for being here. And if you do need to leave, we understand. Okay, next. Well, I get the pleasure of introducing the hire that was made, the Permit Improvement Strategy Manager. She is our captor that has ensured that we've been able to move this work. We all know that if we wouldn't have had this FTE in place, we never would be with you this morning. And so it's my pleasure to bring Terry Tyson to the dais. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, Commissioner Ryan. And thank you, Commissioner Mapps, also for your help and leadership in this effort. And thank you to all the council for taking time on this important topic today. We've been really excited to bring this work to you. Before I dive in, I want to acknowledge the task force members who are all in attendance today. It's their collective work that I will be sharing with you. And then I just also want to give you a little bit of a peek about what's ahead. I'm going to give you right now an overview of the process or the current kind of improvements that we're working on in real time. And then we're going to move into some of the bigger, more council-driven issues and recommendations that the task force is wanting you all to consider today. So one of the first outcomes of the task force was to identify a North Star, something on which we could focus our efforts while also regularly revisiting the audit recommendations to keep us focused and on track. You can see our overarching goal here on the slide, reducing the time to receive a building permit by 1/3 and to improve the customer experience. Next slide, please. Shortly after the task force began, a survey was sent to about 1,100 customers who had applied for a commercial or residential building permit between January and June of 2021. We're pleased to say that customers obviously care about this because the response rate was incredibly high at 26%. Also, another reason we know that customers care about this and are engaged is that nearly 200 of the respondents took the time to write in suggestions. And I know I don't always write in suggestions when I take one of those surveys, but they actually took the time to write suggestions and ideas for improvement. The level of engagement was significant. Our customers care about this and they want to support us and help us improve. The results affirmed what the task force focus was on, and that is, and we just felt really good about the responses and felt like we were aligned with what the customer wanted. Next slide, please. You'll see from this is the main themes from our respondents. The main themes were centered around difficulty in navigating and understanding the requirements and the system. And customers say that our processes, requirements, and systems are difficult to understand and to navigate. Next slide. So what have we been up to on the task force? Well, we took the customer feedback and used it to inform and further refine its process, our process improvements. This is a summary of some, not all, because there are many more, of the projects either completed or currently in process, all focused on supporting and equipping the customer in preparing a successful application, as was referred to earlier. It's not easy to put together a successful application. And frankly, COVID and going to an online format really quickly didn't help with that. The permitting center is no longer open. You can't get face-to-face in-person help at this time due to COVID. And so there was a huge transition for staff and customers moving to completely online. Here's a list again of some things that we've been focused on. It's not comprehensive, but improving the customer application portal. So where people first enter an interface, identifying and implementing website improvements, super critical, everything from site searches to updating old information, rethinking and updating minimum submittal information for customers. So that's the information that you know what the minimum information is that you need to actually complete an application. And creating minimum submittal requirements for the right of way. It's a whole nother level of complications and information you need to know. Documentation of the water administrative rule. This had not been previously available, and so the Water Bureau took that on. And then creating a community dashboard for tracking the permitting process and creating and implementing a shared customer communication policy. Next slide, please. So I want to pause on two of those things, the adoption of consistent review and customer communication policy and tracking monthly performance data. Two huge accomplishments of the task force since April. The first is the rollout and ongoing support of a consistent review and customer communication policy across bureaus. And the second is tracking performance data. They're both directly connected to issues identified in the audit. Next slide, please. So the establishment of a policy, a shared policy, which was developed with input and endorsement from all the bureaus with the outcome of shared expectations across the bureaus around review practices and customer communication was hugely significant. All 6 task force directors led this effort. In particular, directors Warner, Jordan, and Solmer planned and implemented an employee rollout plan and a permitting staff town hall, which was held on December 3rd. I want to underscore the importance of this town hall. You've heard many people say how hard our permitting review staffs and inspectors work, and they do. I've learned over the last 6 months more than I ever thought imaginable about the level of complexity and the amount of work that it takes to get a permit through the whole process to issuance. I want to underscore how employees that I heard from after the task force felt so positive about it. Most of them that I heard from were long-term permitting employees and talking about how this was an unprecedented and impactful event for them, a first, and one that seemed to signal something different and hopeful. I want to pause just a moment at this point and invite any of the directors that might want to share kind of their reflections on how this worked as a task force and how you see it impacting our work going forward.
Thank you, Terry. Chris Warner, I'm the director of PBOT. I just want to underscore, I've heard from council, and I really appreciate in terms of not kind of blaming staff. As leaders, it really is our responsibility to kind of step up. They are just implementing the policies that city council and we as bureaus have put into place. So unless we can get to the core function of in terms of what those policies and if they're conflicting policies, all that work, that needs to be on us as leaders. As you know, this pandemic period has been very difficult for us in terms of just connecting with our staff. So at PBOT, at least we found trying to do digital meetings, do all these kind of things just to bring staff together has been a positive thing. So I think this is the first time we've ever attempted to bring together all the staff from the different permitting agencies. For instance, out of my nearly 1,000 employees, about 26 of them work actually on the permitting issues, but they are a core function and they are really vital to the success of the city. So to have them with their brethren from other bureaus, we think is a good positive first step in terms of kind of continuing that work. Really, from the public works bureaus, we are very focused on not necessarily, we're building infrastructure that's going to be there for generations, whether it's sidewalks or street access. Once the building permit is done, then a lot of the city bureaus kind of step away. But as public works bureaus, we're maintaining that infrastructure for decades and generations. So for us, it's important for us to work on this. And this was a great step. And I want to thank Commissioners Mapps and Ryan for bringing us together. We've made progress, but we still have a ton of work to do. So thank you very much.
Director Jordan, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks. If I can, I'll follow up on Chris and certainly agree with all the points he made. I also want to thank commissioners that are driving this. First time in my 7 years that I've had commissioners this intensely focused on an issue that's a multi-bureau issue, a multidisciplinary issue. And the only thing I would add to Chris, and maybe just amplify, is that it's not insignificant to have all of the development review staff together and be thought of as a team together, because a lot of what we have to get over, I think, ultimately, if we're going to improve this, is to create a common corporate culture that people adhere to in this development review process. It really is the city's public-private partnership with the private sector to create the kind of built environment we want. And for all of our employees to come together, I guess maybe for the first time ever in development review, is not insignificant in a step to create this kind of consistent and collaborative corporate culture, which I think you can build improvement on. So it was, I think, a really worthwhile endeavor just to get everybody together around consistency in the process. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your experiences getting to that point. It was hard work, but it really paid off. And I think it'll continue to pay off dividends as we move forward with customer experience training for employees and also support for them. And this is hard work. And we're under a lot of strain. And so the customer service training, customer experience training is to support employees to be successful, because that's what everybody wants. I'm going to move then to the second thing that I want to highlight. Before I go to the next slide, though, I just want to map out that one of the huge recommendations in the task force or in the audit was performance metrics. And performance metrics is a best practice. Building a culture, a data-driven culture, is something the task force has begun. Let's move to the next slide. So the second improvement, and I will say again, another first for the city and an industry best practice that was called out by the audit, was to begin regularly tracking performance metrics. The task force has developed data sets and has been reviewing this performance data at our monthly meetings together. We've been working to collect and organize the data. What you see right here is one of the data sets that we have been looking at regularly. And I'm going to hand it over to Andy Peterson from the Bureau of Development Services, who I've been working with on these data sets, to give just a brief overview of what you're looking at here. And then we will stop for another 10 minutes of Q&A. Andy?
Great, thanks, Terry, and good morning, commissioners and Mr. Mayor. This slide presents the average time it takes for a permit to move through the system from application submittal to issuance. The data is shown for both commercial and residential work, and it's broken down into the three primary work types for building permits: the alterations, additions, and new construction. We're presenting this data from beginning in January of 2021, which is really when the permitting system became entirely operational online. That was about a 3-year plan compressed into 6 months or so, given the changes that were going on in the economy and the pandemic. But we essentially at that point had an electronic system that allowed the applicant to submit their application, and the permit could be processed through the entire effort all the way through to permit issuance. So we now have a year's worth of information. And as you can see, there are some trend lines appearing, and we'll continue to track this as we go on into the future. But this is a first really good start for us.
Thank you, Andy. We can go to the next slide and open it up for some Q&A.
Commissioner Hardesty, I'm not surprised your hand came up. We have data in front of us here in this work session. What is your question?
My question is, what is the best practice for how long should a permitting process take? I know we take longer than anybody in Oregon, so I'm just curious, what's the average in other communities?
Well, if it was apples and apples, that would be an easy answer. I will actually, Andy.
Apples and apples as far as the amount of days.
Right. So Andy, do you have any quick response to that? When we measure it across other jurisdictions, both locally and nationally, we are clearly much slower, if you will. So that's why we're here. Andy, did you want to add anything to that?
Only that each jurisdiction has different ways they approach the work, and in some cases they are segmented, and so you have to complete X before you can move to Y, before you can move to Z. We push all X, Y, and Z together, which is some of the confusion, but also lends the ability to build on one another as we go through the process. Again, that apples to oranges comparison can be difficult to make there.
What was really important, Commissioner Hardesty, is this actually getting some established data sets and having that as a part of the culture where we monthly will now start looking at this was really key. Like, we need to just know where we are and how we can improve. And we have so far to go in terms of that improvement. But I just want to compliment once again that everyone is leaning into looking at this data, beginning the journey when you move into a data-driven culture. Takes some time. At first, it's so alarming, it can feel shaming, but it's not. Again, it's just a system that needs to improve. and you can't really do your surgery until you diagnose. And so we're in that honest, transparent diagnosis phase. And I just really appreciate that there's been that willingness to lean into that. And so thank you. And I'm really happy that we brought these slides today. And thanks again for all the bureaus for agreeing to that. Commissioner Mapps.
Yes, we were doing comparisons a moment ago, trying to compare Portland to other jurisdictions. I was wondering if we could pull up that slide we just looked at a moment ago and compare how Portland is doing to the standards we've set to ourselves. I want to make sure that the room understands where we're at.
Are you talking about the data slide? Yeah.
Yes. So I think this slide is showing us how long it takes to get commercial and residential permits through for different kinds of projects. One of the things that I think it's important for my colleagues to notice are those horizontal dotted lines towards the bottom of each graph, which I believe, well, actually, can maybe a staff person who's more competent walk us through. I believe the horizontal dotted lines shows us what our goals are. And I wonder if someone could unpack why our actual performance is just so much higher than what our goals, the goals that we have set for ourselves happen to be.
Andy, I think you're back to explain the dotted lines.
Certainly. The dotted lines do represent what our first take on what goals could be for those different types of work, both residential and commercial. And they were based on some early data that we'd collected as far as average times for getting permits in the Portland system. And we wanted to reduce where we were by a third, and that's what established these dotted lines. Our current performance is above those goal lines, and quite honestly, it's getting down to those goals that make this task force work so important. And how we get there and what systematic changes can be made or process changes can be made to help us get there. That focus, as someone mentioned earlier, on early information to the customer so that permits are in the system and they're ready to be reviewed and approved as quick as possible will make a difference here, because there are multiple cycles that we go through that extend that time frame to get to where we can approve the permit. So lots of emphasis on the early information. That's on us as well, to be able to provide good, clear, crisp communication to the customer on what's needed to get those permits through the system, which will immediately shorten the number of cycles, or should shorten the number of cycles, which will again decrease the time.
Thanks.
Does that help?
Yep.
Thanks, Commissioner Mapps. Anyone else? Otherwise, we can keep moving forward. Any other hands up? I'm scanning the screens. Okay. Terry, take it away. Go to the next slide.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. So now we're going to move into some of the big thorny issues that we want the council to consider, and that will help us know if we're on the right track with you all. And you can have, and with the intent that we're coming back to you after we introduce some of these high level ideas that we have for your action and approval. So we've talked about the repeat recommendations that have been ongoing since 1997. And one of those was brought up again in the March 2021 audit. And the past year's audits, the echoing of an ongoing systemic challenge. And you heard some of our testimony of customers, guests today, talk about firsthand experiences with that. It is difficult for customers to navigate a process that moves from bureau to bureau, up to sometimes 7 different bureaus that a customer has to interact with independently, with no single point of contact, and thus no single point of accountability. And frankly, accountability and decision-making is one of the things that has been repeatedly brought up as well. The current system also requires division leaders and directors from different bureaus to resolve conflicts over code and other regulatory issues in an ad hoc way, with no guiding oversight decision-making criteria, which causes, frankly, big delays and frustrations for both customers and for staff. The task force has started to research and explore changes to our system and how it's designed. At our last two meetings, we worked in small groups to talk about possible ways to resolve this long-standing issue. Today, we want to share some of the possible reform options for reorganizing our current structure. Next slide, please. So, one of the things we looked at is what's happening in other jurisdictions. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. So there are four things that we are looking at for consideration in terms of how we work together and how our system is designed. The first would be a multidisciplinary review team approach. This model is used by the city of Phoenix, where permit reviews are done by interdisciplinary teams organized by project type. Each team has a lead supervisor who coordinates the work, monitors the flow, works out conflicts, and who is the point of contact if issues or problems arise. The second is to merge public works development review under PBOT. This model is used by the city of Seattle, where an established point of contact and decision-making for policy and code conflicts in the right-of-way is a one point of contact, and the role is given sole decision-making authority to resolve conflicts. It creates opportunity for quality of code regulations between BDS and infrastructure bureaus. And then there's a cross-trained team, so it's prepared to address external customers' inquiries and internal City Hall staff questions. Next slide, please. Moving all employees to BDS. So we would move all of the permitting review teams under BDS's peer review, draft MOUs to articulate which bureau has authority for which types of decision-making, assign decisions and appeals to the city engineer / urban forester from their bureau. BDS makes process and organizational decisions as well as staffing decisions. This could include multidisciplinary teams, for example. Optional element to include code writing from these bureaus so they could be centralized, and you'll hear more about those ideas later as well, and can be considered holistically rather than in silos with a single system for gathering input. And then a hybrid model, which takes the most valuable parts from the three proposals to design to optimize the qualities that we want in a system in Portland, and interdisciplinary teams to improve the customer experience and increase staff's ability to work with multiple elements, including staffing, hiring, retention, and addressing in-demand roles. So the variance in permit flows, if you will, in volume. So what you may notice that's missing here is that we have not proposed that we keep the same system. The task force was pretty clear that status quo is no longer an option and we need to do something different. And so I want to call that out because that's significant and that is action. And I want to just review what we're looking for today and the next steps. The next steps for the task force is to designate a small work group from task force members to fully explore what each of these options would involve. Efficiencies for customers, efficiencies for staff, the cost of these different models, the implementation plan, et cetera, with the goal of bringing a recommendation for system change to the council for consideration and approval. So now we can move to the next slide and then on to some Q&A.
Thank you, Terry. So the room is now open to Q&A again?
Yes.
Okay, next slide. Commissioner Maps.
I was wondering if staff could provide a little bit more detail on a couple of these system design changes. I'm particularly interested in the public works project, for example.
I'm going to call some help from Kurt Kruger from PBOT to give a little more definition to this proposal.
Great, thanks, Terry and Commissioner Mapsick. Happy to provide as much information as you would like. This was a concept that mirrors a lot of other jurisdictions that have a different form of government, the form of a city manager, public works director, and really looking at putting infrastructure bureaus under one location to help resolve right-of-way conflicts that show up, water lines and sewer lines and sidewalk locations, and provide that and addressing that one point of contact. This is similar to the city of Seattle. I was on the phone with the city of Corvallis. It's a similar situation there, that a lot of that authority in the right of way is underneath their city engineer and delegated appropriately. So the concept was kind of addressing the concerns that come up around overall consolidation, but putting the infrastructure bureaus in one location, because the review is a little different from the infrastructure standpoint than it is from the Bureau of Development Services. As Director Warner mentioned, we're the end owner of those facilities, water, sewer, forestry, and PBOT. And so our relationship is a little bit different than that of the on-site development review. So I hope that helps. Happy to answer more questions.
It sure does. Kurt, do you have any intuition about how implementing this reform would either speed up or slow down timelines for getting permits out, and how it would change the customer's experience?
And teasing this out with some of our customers right now, they're excited about this notion of having that singular point of contact. Public works permits can get held up when certain policies conflict with each other, and having that resolved in one location and having that place for them to go would definitely speed some things up. I think it was also Commissioner Warner who mentioned that there are policies that result in delays because we want to accomplish a lot of things and sometimes they don't work well together. And having a person in a position that can be delegated the appropriate authority to resolve those conflicts, so they don't have to go up to multiple bureau directors or multiple chief engineers to resolve a conflict in real time.
And one more question. What is the intuition behind having PBOT be the ultimate arbiter here?
Great question. If you dive into the city charter, right-of-way authority actually falls to the PBOT city engineer. It's been sort of watered down over the years with the multiple bureaus that play in the right-of-way, but by charter, that is where that authority sits.
Great, thank you very much.
Mr. Hardesty.
Thank you. I think I have two quick questions. One is the plan that coming out of COVID permitting will all be online. That's one question. And I see heads going up and down, yes. And so for homeowners or people new to permitting process, how will they get educated as to how to use the system? Because one of the biggest complaints that I hear is that people get bad information the first time and they have to come back over and over again. And depending on who they talk to, they are asked for different information in order for them to be able to achieve their permit. And so I just want to know if that's true, and if so, how is that coming into the deliberations that you're doing right now?
I will start this off and then punt to somebody from the bureaus. But I will say that at our first meeting, Commissioner, this came up, that we need to spend more time on the initial point of contact. And it always seems counterintuitive because everyone's so busy. And so why would you spend more and more time with the initial contact when you're so stressed about getting back to everybody else in your queue? But the truth is that we're measuring this, of course, but we're finding that if you lean in at the first stage, then of course it will eliminate all those questions later on. So it's kind of like everything in life. If you do more work on the foundational level, then the next steps are better off. You learn that as you do life, right? So anyway, is there anyone from one of the bureaus that would like to add anything to that, since this was a topic at our task force meetings?
Commissioner Ryan, if I can give props to my colleagues in the Bureau of Development Services. Prior to the pandemic, we all had staff that would sit at booths down in the permit center here in the 1900 building. And we would be available to customers that walked in every day. And there would be a line of 25 or 30 people every morning at 7:30 waiting to see those staff. It took us about a year to be able to stand up a new service. They've introduced a 15-minute appointment. where customers, and this is actually an improvement from where we were back in February of 2020, we actually now get a pre-submittal set of questions, an idea of what an applicant wants to do. So we go into and prepared to have a conversation with our customers without them just walking in the door and surprising us with something we hadn't seen before, which resulted in a lot of time having to get back to them. So that is a small step, but a big step in making some process improvements in this virtual environment. So a lot of kudos to the folks in BDS that have stood that up, and it's been a success. I've heard that from my staff in PBOT, that this is a big improvement.
Thank you, Kurt. May I add also, Commissioner Hardesty, BDS is planning to offer very limited in-person appointments to customers, specifically customers that are new to the process, and also customers who need additional help. So we are planning, once the buildings are reopened, we're planning to provide those in-person services by appointment.
Terry, I see your hand up. Terry Tyson.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to circle back. What my intention too at the end of presenting this was to open it up to Director Long and Fire Marshal Scheimel if they had any reflections on the process that the task force is doing ongoing with looking at system change, and just invite their voices into the conversation.
Thank you, Terry. This is Adina Long, Director of Portland Parks and Recreation. I just wanted to state that I've just really appreciated the opportunity to participate on the task force. It's been illuminating and informative experience. My key takeaway is that if the actual issues are not accurately identified and addressed, then improvement just won't happen. Permitting delays and other inefficiencies can largely be attributable to specific areas that must be resolved in order to see substantive improvements, because the work streams of all 7 bureaus are largely interdependent in many regards. And I just want to also say that the task force investigation of structural improvement opportunities that we've been discussing, these 3 options, really need to be thoughtful and innovative. So I appreciate that we're looking at other jurisdictions and how they're doing their work. I think that's really important. Some of these options, such as multidisciplinary teams, while they create a more shared approach and responsibility to permit review, they also have us, there's an ability for us to retain subject matter expertise, which personally I appreciate. Other options like the consolidation option reduces subject matter expertise, and there are some concerns that such reorganization might result in infrastructure failure, because if bureaus no longer have oversight over the infrastructure for which they're experts and responsible, there's some potential loss there. So I'm just hopeful that our continued exploration and examination will yield an approach or approaches that address the root causes of these inefficiencies, from application all the way to issuance. And I'd like to thank all of the staff and my colleagues for their hard work and their humility as we work together to do better. And also gratitude to Commissioners Ryan and Maps and Terry for their leadership. Thank you.
And Fire Marshal Scheimel, are you on the call? Wanted to invite you.
I am here. Thanks, Terry. Well said, Director Long. So I can echo everything Director Long said as well. I think this experience has been very positive. I think for a long time, I can speak for fire. We kind of just stay within our group and keep making the changes as we see fit, and being able to be part of the task force and actually learning not only from other jurisdictions, but actually other bureaus. So what's working well for others, we're able to come to the table and learn from that. We've saw some good data on some bureaus meeting timelines and being very efficient, and others not. And it's nice to be able to see what that workload looks like, how many staff they have, and just really, having the conversation so we can keep improving. And I agree that, from start to finish, we're we're looking at better ways to educate the public before they even come in for submittal, and then just keep working well with our partners, fire, SITS, and we do a lot of our reviews hand in hand with life safety at BDS. So looking at the different type of structures, we're just keeping that in mind and seeing what works best when we see these different choke points and how we can get through them. So it's been very positive. So I think we're moving in the right direction for sure.
Thank you both. Mayor Wheeler, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. I wonder if any thought has been given to if there is either consolidation or alternatively, if we move to a single point of contact concierge model, similar to what they have, I think, according to that slide in Seattle, does the mission of any of these 7 bureaus change in terms of what they're trying to do? And let me be very specific. There are life safety permitting bureaus. There are urban forestry permitting bureaus. There's BDS that really focuses on the timing efficiency and making sure that code is adhered to. Under the proposed reforms to speed things up, to make things more efficient, will the mission of any of these functions change? For example, and I didn't see, and I was sort of expecting to see a slide that said, our top 5 criteria listed in order of priority are these. Have we changed our priorities based on our desire to respond to the customer concerns?
So Director Long, you have your hand up. Did you want to answer the question, or do you have another comment?
You can go first.
Well, I was going to first say that those 5 criteria, if I might be so bold to reply to that, is timeliness, consistency, predictability, accessibility, and clear communication. Those are the things we've sort of all been centering around. I'm not going to say that those are exclusive or that those are necessarily in the rank order of what's most important, but those are the things that we've been centering our thinking around first and foremost.
So let me ask the question backwards then. Are there any bureaus whose priorities are not what you just identified? Timeliness, speed, ease, consistency. In other words, is serving the needs of the customer the priority for all aspects of our permitting function today, or are there other overarching priorities that get in the way of our permitting being quick, efficient, hassle-free, and low cost?
Yeah.
And if there are impediments, are we going to change them?
Mayor, I'd like to jump in, and then any director wants to dive in as well. We had a long conversation in the first meetings around this as well. Like, we didn't want the word speed to negate the fact that we want things to be done right, and that we want to make sure that efficiency is a better word, and that sticking to the values and making sure that things are safe and that the missions are delivered from each bureau. So this is not about negating the expertise that comes from each bureau. And so the tension that lives with those do not have to be separate, but there is a tension there. That's called what this is like, I'm sure, in every high-performing permitting system across the country. And so the last thing we're doing is not lifting that up as well. But that is a condition and a tension that we live with as we make these reforms. And I don't think a meeting that I've been in, especially in the small groups, doesn't have dialogue to this point. And Director Jordan, I'm glad your hand's back up. I saw it earlier and it went down.
So can I just, before we get to my Director Jordan, can I just ask, because and I know I'm getting into treacherous territory here. But
no, you're just getting into the.
But I'm doing it on purpose. I just want you to know I'm doing it on purpose. Portland has many overlays because Portland has many values that frankly aren't priorities for other cities that we are routinely compared to. They may be equity values, they may be environmental values, there may be other considerations that are filtering into our permitting process and slowing it down. Are we going to have a serious conversation about some of the places where other priorities may be leading us to a less efficient, more burdensome permitting process? Are we going to have that honest conversation? Because frankly, I think we need to.
Yes, Mayor, and I hope that what you're experiencing right now by everything you're listening to is we are having those conversations at every task force meeting, and we will continue.
I love this and I appreciate it. And again, I want to underscore.
No, this is great. Welcome. This is the conversation we're supposed to have.
This is past due, and I appreciate your leadership, and Commissioner.
Director Jordan.
Thank you, Commissioner. So to your question, Mr. Mayor, I would say that the building permit review process may be the #1 triple bottom line business process that this city has. And anybody that's tried to do triple bottom line analysis on almost any question knows that it's complicated. And I will give you an example of where, at least for one bureau, I think the bureau's mission got in the way of its performance in the development review process, and that was BES about 2 years ago. If you looked at the data, what data we had from a couple of years ago, we sucked basically. And we were near the bottom of the performance realm almost all the time. And it was not a policy problem, it was a management problem. And it was understanding the balance between adhering to policy and regulation and rule and the development of the community. And we all have that challenge. All of the bureaus have the challenge of understanding their own rules, their own regulations, their own policies, and the mission of this process, which is to collaborate with the private sector to build the kind of community we want. And we, a couple of years ago, had kind of lost our way a little bit. And we have since changed that. And we're performing much better than we were before as a bureau. I think that can be extended to all the bureaus in the sense that I don't think the fundamental challenge in development services is a policy problem at the council level. I think it's a classic triple bottom line challenge in that you have to balance all of those goods in trying to build the kind of community you want. One of our big challenges at BES is that we care about the natural environment to a very great degree. That's kind of part of our mission. So we look at the built environment and how does it relate to the natural environment as we try to develop the city we want. There are other bureaus here who have interests that are more social in nature, and that the interface between the built environment and what that means to the community, let's use affordable housing as an example, is a real part of what we're trying to balance in this process. So I'll go back to my original statement. This process is the biggest triple bottom line process we have. It ultimately is up to the council interfacing with their management about whether a new policy or an expanded policy gets in the way or slows down or inhibits development of the built environment in this city. And those are complicated questions that we need to collaborate better on between, I'm not using this term pejoratively, the political class and the management class of this organization. And we need a lot closer relationship when we talk about those kinds of things. That goes all over. I also want to circle back to Kurt's statement about public works permitting and the nature of that part of the work. I think you could extend that relationship issue to the policy level also, not just the permit issues. We all make our policies independent of the other bureaus. And we try to collaborate, we try to communicate. We know we have to coexist in the right of way. But when my bureau is working with our commissioner, no matter when it is, on an environmental policy that may have impacts on other public works departments or on the development process, we don't necessarily engage from day one on that. We often develop the whole policy and then we send it around for comment. And we've already baked the whole thing pretty much. So this public works collaboration, I think among the infrastructure bureaus would not only work better from the day-to-day perspective, but also reflect up into the policymaking perspective and have us be more collaborative at that level also. Sorry to suck all the air out of my own office.
Thank you, Mike. That's actually very helpful, and I appreciate that. I suspect BES isn't the only place where this is coming into play. I mean, one of the manifestations of fragmentation is that bureaus tend to start focusing on their priorities as opposed to necessarily the customer's priorities, particularly if they're not a front-facing bureau. And I appreciate that.
If I could jump in one more time, I want to circle back to Commissioner Hardesty's statement about how these bureaus are funded and how they're managed. A long history of a funding mechanism will change the culture of a bureau. And I apologize to the Fire Bureau, but I've used them as an example multiple times. To ask Chief Long, or Chief Boone, excuse me, to focus on development services when she has like 900 higher priorities to deal with in the life safety and fire service and the way she's funded is unrealistic. We need to, and the bureaus are so different in these cases that one thing, thinking about this in a more consolidated way, and I'm not necessarily advocating for total reorganization, but to think about this process in a more consolidated way may help us think about funding in a more consolidated way and staffing in a more consolidated way. Because at the end of the day, this is a weakest link process. The weakest link makes the whole schedule worse. And so it should behoove us all to make sure every function is funded and staffed appropriately to make the whole system work. And that, I think, was really relevant in Commissioner Hardesty's statement.
Thank you for not losing that thread, Mike. We've had this conversation many times. Thank you for that.
Okay, Terry, we move on.
Ready to move on. I'm going to hand it off, and we can pull up the slides again, to my colleague, Shannon Carney, who is the financial policy advisor for Commissioner Mapp's office and who has been helping herd the cats, as Commissioner Ryan said, on this project, particularly around what we're going to talk to you next about, and that is some regulatory and code considerations. Shannon?
Great, thanks, Terry, and thanks, Mayor and Commissioners, for having me here today. I want to say a few words to kind of kick this off and frame this up. But on a personal note, I have to say it's been just really satisfying to work with Terry and the rest of the task force this year. Like many other Bureau staff, I was actually part of the city's permitting reform efforts that we worked on in 2017. And with that work, we definitely made some incremental progress, but we certainly didn't bring about the level of operational and cultural change that this group has already accomplished and that we're aiming for, that you're hearing about today. So that's been really exciting. But that said, the most recent audit that's been referenced a few times from 2021 did build on some of our group's analysis into the issues that sort of vex the permitting system. And one of those issues is certainly the complexity of Portland's regulatory code. I mean, clearly we're historic, we're a sprawling city. And so building here it's always going to be, probably more complex than breaking ground in outlying parts of the metro region. However, I think it's been clearly shown that the city has exacerbated this complexity by not taking into account the challenges that code changes can cause for development customers. As we were working on this in our small group, an analysis that was done by BDS's Performance Analytics and Continuous Improvement Supervisor, Emily Sandy, thank you, Emily, she found that there were no fewer than 47 changes to city code related to the permitting process in the 5 years spanning 2017 to 2021. And of those, 14 were essentially related to compliance with city, state, or federal requirements, so required in that way, or related to a city declared emergency. So 14 out of the 47. And to me, that suggests strongly that the number and timing of code changes that are adopted are to a significant degree under the control of the council. I think that's sort of good news today as we look at changing the regulatory process. A consistent recommendation through the history on this topic has been that the city should find ways to address code complexity, but also increase the awareness of impacts of code changes on residential and commercial development customers. Clearly, the changes to the code must be done through council ordinance, and that's one reason that we wanted to make sure to touch on that in the work session today. And the last thing I'll say is this area of permit reform definitely highlights the critical role that Bureau of Planning and Sustainability play in this process and ensuring that the city has a successful permitting system. So with that, I'd love to hand it off to Donnie Oliveira, Deputy Director of Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Donnie, are you there?
Yes, thanks, Shannon. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning, Mayor. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, commissioners, I'm going to walk through a couple of challenges, then hand it off to my colleague Kim from BDS to walk through a third. We want to just sort of frame the challenge that we're experiencing, that you're all experiencing, or our communities are experiencing, and the possible solutions that not only are on our radar as concepts, but the ideas that we're already have in place. So, as Shannon alluded to, there's several code packages coming to you all in different capacities. And the city actually has 16 codes that are specifically related to development. And of those 16 codes, we actually have 8 bureaus, so the 7 permit bureaus plus BPS. We have 8 bureaus that are essentially stewards of those codes. And that's just sort of the what of our dilemma. Once you start to unpack how we go about doing code or policy changes, we see a wide range of resources that each bureau has to make those changes, different best practices, and even regulatory requirements that influence the process for how code packages come to council. What we're looking at here from our first challenge is the idea of where are the inefficiencies in our systems that we might be able to bridge, both from a resource perspective, but frankly, from an awareness to sort of simplify some of the complexity that Shannon alluded to through coordination. So some of those things look like us just being more invested in spending time on the front end with our infrastructure bureaus. Mike mentioned earlier, just the coordination across the different bureaus about where we're at in different code processes is a start. And some of these things are happening informally already. Some bureaus are having those conversations as a part of projects. So the good news is that some of this work is already in play, but we really need to start to drill down a centralized coordination structure. So some of the solutions that we're investigating and sort of doing more evaluation on is what are the resource needs across the city? We talked about how people are funded really influences how they prioritize their work, and that's totally appropriate. Not only that, but how are we aligning work plans and timelines to ensure that we have the greatest efficiency to go through things like our Planning and Sustainability Commission, historic landmarks, design review, et cetera. The last thing is where this coordination happens is really critical. We've heard a lot about the centralization of the permitting process at BDS, but if we're looking at code and policy development, where is the right place for that coordination to live? So over the next several months, working with the task force and continuing to work with our partners, BPS is really committed to investigating and really unpacking the potential for this sort of solution to increase our coordination. Next slide, please. So challenge number 2 is the reality that frequently when code amendments come to council, it's too late in the game for a lot of influence on sort of the policy direction. And this is really an opportunity for us to think about what work plans are being generated, how they're being generated, and how those processes are coming to council. In this case, I want to just harken back to things I've heard from both Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Hardesty over the years, challenging BPS to ensure that when we bring land use packages to council, that they're council ready. And so for us, that looks like working with the Planning and Sustainability Commission to really work with community, our stakeholders, development partners, to really vet the issues and challenges through that commission. Commissioner Rubio has instructed BPS to start to develop and unpack what BSC's what's on their work plan, what's going through PSC to increase efficiencies there. So in theory, that system should be fluid with how council's experiencing the best quality code packages that PSC can deliver. And with that, there's still an opportunity for us to think about what sort of projects come to council in advance of even that process. So along with the task force, BPS is absolutely committed to looking at the sorts of code amendments that should be coming to council from a policy perspective before it goes through the process of code development. And there's a lot of opportunities for us to look at how we're leveraging the PSC, how we're leveraging the other commissions that support the code packages for the city. But frankly, this is a real opportunity just to align our priorities to the work and resources all the bureaus have. And so I'm going to hand it over to Kim. Kim is on, correct?
Yes.
Awesome.
I'm Kimberly Talent, BDS Land Use Services Division Manager. So the third challenge is the timing of code amendments. Code amendments can happen at any time, sometimes in quick succession. Fee changes can also happen at any time, and it can be a challenge to customers to keep track of which regulations apply to projects that they're designing and permitting. A possible solution for consideration is to consider consolidating effective dates of code changes to twice a year. So one in the spring, one in the fall, and fee changes to once a year at the fiscal year start, except for any declared emergencies. Some next steps with this is further vetting and identification of unintended consequences, identifying limitations. So like I mentioned, emergencies or compliance with state and federal requirements can also fall outside the spring and fall goal dates for code changes, and then drafting an implementation plan. So I think at this point, I'll hand it back to Terry.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, all the presenters. We're going to open it up to Q&A, and I'm going to ask Shannon and Donnie and Kim to help with fielding questions. This is a technical piece, and I need support. So any questions?
Hi, I'll jump in here. But I don't know if this one's for Terry or for Shannon. I'm intrigued by these regulatory reforms that have been suggested. What's the process from getting from where we are today to turning these into ordinances that council might consider?
Terry, I can jump in there. Thank you, Commissioner. So I think this is where we want to get kind of a temperature check, which I know is coming up on the agenda of how members of council view, especially some of these different options. So I think what we could do then is come back to our small group. If there's enough interest in pursuing one or more of these options, then I think we would work together to essentially develop an ordinance to bring to council, especially the timing of code amendments. That seems like one that could be done through a council ordinance. There's some other options on this list that maybe Donnie can speak to, but relate a little bit more to budgetary changes and certainly how we resource the code development process across the bureau. So that would be a little bit, that would either be done through the budget process or in a separate action.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Did someone else on staff want to jump in here on this?
Yeah, Commissioner, I would just offer that the other thing that we want to keep in mind is that we do have our comprehensive plan, which puts some sideboards up for how we approach some of these policy decisions. It's a guiding document for the city at large, but also helps us really set standards for how we do community engagement. Ideally, we do fiscal impacts as a part of that. So these options are all on the table. We would just want to ensure that the city attorneys is helping us navigate what's inbounds related to the comp plan.
I see my colleague Commissioner Rubio has her hand up, so I want to give the floor to her. But just for the record, I want to state that some of these ideas look awfully intriguing to me, and I sure hope the task force can pull together some ordinances for council to begin to consider. These look like some low-hanging fruit that'll make the world better, and I sure hope that we grab it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner Maps, for that. And I just want to echo my colleagues. These concepts are really interesting, and I'm eager to learn where the direction you continue to go as you continue your work together. And I did one of my questions was actually about what Donnie just mentioned about the role of the comprehensive plan as an overlay to this work and as a guiding document. Just wanting to hear a little bit more about how that is being integrated or referenced in the work. And then the other thing I just wanted to highlight is that as we continue to explore, the regulatory aspect with our land use code, I want to just note that rebuilding the planning program within BPS will be essential component to this to ensure that we're successful in this. And what I mean by that is rebuilding the lost staff capacity that over the years, has resulted in us not having staff capacity to regularly update or clean up the code with regularity and keep up in the time. So just want to hear about those two things, and if the staffing capacity is something that we're also talking about for regular updating the code. So I guess that could go to Donnie as a question, or
thanks, Commissioner. I appreciate that. I want to just thank my colleagues and Commissioner Mapp's office, Shannon, and Kelly Torres from Commissioner Ryan's office, and Terry, for really ensuring that the resources were on the table when we had these conversations. So we're evaluating the possible pathways, not just for BPS, but ensuring that all of our bureaus have the resources necessary to not just do this on one-offs, but really maintain the codes in a healthy manner and stay on it and stay diligent on the updates. One of the things we talked about was the old recap program that BPS and BDS used to run. It was like a feedback cycle where we were getting feedback from community and our permit teams about what parts of the code need to be updated. But not only was that good to go up and true up those codes, but it also influenced and helped shape the next policy package that we brought to council. So not only were we seeing cleanup processes through recap, which was the regulatory improvement code package that we would do. We did 8 of them, but it also was informative to the next package that came to council. So these are opportunities for us to invest in systems that maintain a healthier code complex.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this section before we move ahead? Okay, we can go to the next slide. And the next one. And then next one, there we go, temperature check and wrap up. So I am going to hand this over to Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Maps to take us to the final portion of our time together.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Council. We have been taking temperature throughout this work session, so this isn't just the one time we're doing it. We've had great feedback throughout. Earlier, though, I did ask if you could bring us home with a very concrete statement as we go back into the task force mode to continue to build this. This is a very complex problem. It takes very complex solutions. And I hope that what you've witnessed today is that every topic that you brought up has been discussed on some level. And this just affirms what we must continue to drive home when we come back. This is soil work, it's cultural work. And again, if it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. So I just really appreciate all of the statements made from every commissioner and from the directors, and of course, from our guests who appeared today. With all that, I was giving you some time to think on what would it be? What is your last comment you'd like to make that's very concrete and gives all of us on the task force something to chew on and make sure that we have it top of mind as we go back into the task force mode. I open it up to all members of the council. Mayor Wheeler.
My concrete proposal based on today's presentation, consolidate the permitting function under one leader with clearly stated objectives that are prioritized, and make sure that the structure, the systems, and the incentives are all based on the achievement of those priorities that is determined through an objective, measurable outcome-based system.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. Commissioner Mapps.
I largely agree with the mayor, but stand in a slightly different position. I do think that consolidating or at least coordinating services is something that we need to take a strong look at. That's also, frankly, we should acknowledge in our commission form of government that it's really challenging, I think, to get from where we are today to that space. That's one of the reasons why I'm particularly excited about the public works, consolidating public works, or at least coordinating the public works piece of our permitting process. I think that would be a great test case to see what consolidation and coordination would look like. I'd also say that I'm deeply interested in learning more about what our task force thinks about how multidisciplinary review teams would work. Today, we also heard about several regulatory changes. I hope that we can flesh those out. And I really think of those as falling into two buckets. Regulatory changes that have budget implications, and we're starting a budget process. So this is an appropriate time to begin to think about those. But I'm particularly excited about regulatory changes that don't necessarily impact the general fund. I sure hope the task force can move forward and begin to draft some ordinances that allows council to begin to dive into some of those issues.
Thank you, Commissioner Mapps, and you will be there with me to ensure that we keep flying that direction. Mayor, your hand is up still. Do you have another statement? Okay.
No, it's just because I forgot to take it down.
That's cool. And then Commissioner Hardesty.
First, I want to say thank you to all the bureau directors who are leaning in and being really honest about the challenges and opportunities. It is rare for us to have multi-bureau groups working on multi-bureau problems collectively. So first, just thank you for your willingness to really lean in. The second thing, I don't want to predispose what your outcomes are. And what I want to do is have you think big, because again, I've lived through at least 3 of these fixes that actually didn't fix anything, and in many cases made it worse. So so please be thoughtful and intentional. And you cannot do it without realizing that there is a cost just to how we fund city services. And so in the context of your work, and I know it's not the work of the task force, I want to be really clear, but in the context of your work, I hope you will just remember that for better or worse, this is what we have at the moment. And we need to be intentional about how we ensure that the services that we want, we have the ability to fund, and that we're being intentional about that. So again, I will end as I started. Just thank you so much for leaning in. I know all of you have so much on your plate right now and have for the last couple of years, because we keep having crises after crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioner Rubio.
I want to thank you, Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Mapps, and also Terry and all the Bureau leadership and staff that have been working to improve this for so many months. Clearly, a significant amount of work and collaboration went into this project to arrive here in this very aligned place that we are today. It's very evident from the collaborative presentation that you made. And my colleagues have already outlined several really good points to keep top of mind, but I'll only add to that is, again, things I've brought up before about thinking about the comprehensive plan's role in this project, as well as strengthening the regulatory capacity to ensure that we have regular code updates, because this is really what underscores and will serve as the backbone and hold up the permitting function to operate smoothly. So we need to make sure that that's strong and regular and updated. But other than that, I'm very appreciative of this presentation. I think we've had a very great conversation. I've learned a lot. And I'm also very supportive and committed to supporting this work moving forward. So thank you again.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. I will just add that for me, the biggest premise of this was to get the right people at the table. And so it wasn't easy I first called all my colleagues to say, hey, I'm going to try to have your director's time be committed to this. And I got a thumbs up from all of you, and I really appreciate that. That was last March when the audit came out. And I want to say that there is the biggest premise of continuous improvement, is including the right people at the table and keeping them at the table. So what's really been impressive for me is that the attendance at the task force meetings has not waned, it's actually improved as this has gone on. So that alone says something. I also am committed to making sure that we keep it data-driven, that we move to that type of culture so that every month, whether we like what we're looking at or not, we're looking at what is happening. And so we don't wait for the next audit to tell us this isn't working. And so those two items are cultural change that I'm really, really proud of, and those will be sustained. I've heard enough today to know that we have some great feedback to keep us moving. I'm also clear that we will be coming back with some more dialogue, but more importantly, some changes. But as was said earlier from Director Jordan, this is deeper than policy. Practice eats policy for lunch. And so we must focus on how we work together as a complex multi-bureau system. I did want to do one little temperature check moment with all of you, just to confirm we've been here before and we've kept the exact same system pretty much as we know it. So I want to see all my colleagues at this time go to your what's it called? The functions that allow you to put your thumbs up. Are you ready to move forward and definitely kind of blow up, if you will, and do surgery to the status quo? Can we get a thumbs up on that? Are you in agreement with all of the directors on that one? You can do it on your screen, or you can find it down here. That is it. All right, I think we have our hands up, and so that means thumbs up in this case. So anyway, I really want to say I appreciate all of you for leaning into this. It can seem like a really wonky system, but as said earlier, it's a triple winner with what Mike Jordan was explaining earlier. Thank you, Director Jordan, for your patience. I've learned a lot from each and every one of the directors and all the staff members, and I just want to say that it's been a real pleasure to get inside what your daily behaviors consist of. I have so much empathy for how difficult it is. And yes, it has been more difficult since we've been in this remote environment. It has been a factor. I will go ahead and pass this over to my partner in this endeavor who said yes to my phone call last March. I know there are times where you might have regretted it. So I just want to thank Commissioner Mapps for being patient and persistent along with me. Bring us home, Commissioner Mapps.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. And also thank you for that phone call back in March. I think the work that we're doing here with this task force and this council today is some of the most important and transformative work that we can possibly engage in. I also want to thank all the staff members who presented today and all the members of the public who came and engaged in this conversation. I can't express my gratitude and admiration enough for the dozens and dozens and dozens of people who have participated in our task force meetings over the past nearly year at this point. We came together because I think we heard a message from the public, and the message was the status quo is no longer acceptable. I think one of the things I learned today from my dialogue with members of council is that this council also finds the status quo to be unacceptable. The good news is, thanks to the good work of our friends and colleagues, we have a set of proposals that bring forward systems design change and regulatory change, which can, I think, make our permitting process work more efficiently. And if we can get that done, we can also supercharge our recovery from the COVID crisis and really engage in the work of building a city ready for the 21st century. That's why I'm at this table. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward to our next steps. Thank you very much. And here, Commissioner Hardesty, do you have your hand up?
It's just, yeah. I think we are done, my friends. So we give you 8 minutes back, and have a wonderful Tuesday. See you soon.
Thank you all. Great presentation. We are adjourned.